I never thought I'd be writing one of these posts, but here I am. Life has a funny way of teaching you about boundaries, sometimes through people who refuse to respect them. 3 weeks ago, my old college roommate Melanie called me with a sob story about losing her job and apartment in the same week. I let her crash at my place just for a few days. Yesterday, when I finally asked her to leave, she pulled out a folder of printed tenant laws and told me she legally had rights to my apartment now. She wasn't leaving. The look in her eyes was almost triumphant. Let me back up. I'm 31, living in my dream one-bedroom in downtown Portland, where rent is criminal but the location is worth it. It's small but meticulously decorated. I'm a graphic designer and work remotely, so my space doubles as my office and sanctuary. I've spent 3 years making it perfectly mine, from the IKEA desk I customized with resin art to the hanging plants that make my Zoom background look professionally staged. When Melanie's text popped up after nearly 8 years of radio silence, I was surprised, but not immediately alarmed. We'd been close in college before drifting apart after graduation. Her message was casual. "Hey, stranger, how have you been?" Followed by increasingly desperate updates about her life falling apart. She'd lost her marketing job due to company restructuring, her boyfriend had dumped her, and her roommate had given her 2 days to vacate because the roommate's sister needed a place. Nowhere to go, no money for a deposit on a new place. She claimed to just need somewhere to crash for a few days while figuring things out, promising to be the perfect guest. I hesitated. Our friendship had fizzled for reasons, mainly her tendency to borrow things without asking and her chronic inability to honor commitments. But the memory of our 2 a.m. study sessions and road trips overrode my caution. Plus, who hasn't needed help at some point? So I said yes, with clear conditions. Just a few days, she'd need to be quiet during my work hours and no visitors since. My place was tiny. She arrived with 4 suitcases and her emotional support hamster, Winston. That was 3 weeks ago. What followed was a slow-motion nightmare of boundary violations, each one small enough that confronting it seemed petty, but together they formed a pattern I should have recognized sooner. Updated. Wow, I wasn't expecting this much attention. My post blew up overnight. Thank you all for the supportive comments and advice. Several people asked if I'd noticed red flags before. Looking back, they were everywhere. Should I have trusted my instincts from the beginning? In college, Melanie had been the fun one, spontaneous, adventurous, always ready with a crazy story. What I conveniently forgot was how those qualities affected our shared living space. Dishes piled up until they grew mold, borrowed clothes returned stained or never at all, and mysterious charges on our shared utility accounts. Those same patterns emerged in my apartment, but amplified. By day 3, her belongings had migrated from the air mattress in my living room to every available surface. Makeup on my bathroom counter, clothes draped over my furniture, random snacks on my kitchen counters. Winston's cage took up half my coffee table, the wood now warped from water spills. My work routine collapsed almost immediately. I'd find her conducting loud personal calls during my client meetings, forcing me to retreat to my bedroom with apologetic glances at my Zoom camera. She'd promise to be quiet, then forget 20 minutes later. I started scheduling meetings at local cafes, adding $6 lattes to my daily expenses. The few days stretched into a week with no mention of leaving and no visible job hunting progress. I gently brought it up after day 8. Any luck with apartments? She'd always have a vague response about still looking, everything being so expensive, but claiming to have an interview tomorrow. There was always an interview tomorrow. Always a promising lead that mysteriously evaporated. Always a reason why this week wasn't good for apartment hunting. Meanwhile, my food disappeared at alarming rates. My specialty coffee beans that I rationed carefully each week, gone in 2 days. The meal prep containers neatly stacked in my fridge, empty by Wednesday, though I'd made enough for my entire work week. When I mentioned it, she'd respond with wide-eyed innocence, claiming she thought it was up for grabs and promising to replace it, but never did. Then came the friends. Despite my explicit no visitors rule, I came home from a client meeting to find 3 strangers lounging on my couch, drinking my wine, one of them actually wearing my Northwestern University sweatshirt. Melanie brushed off my concerns, saying they were just in the neighborhood and stopped by for a quick hello. The quick hello lasted 6 hours and emptied both my wine rack and my refrigerator. They talked and laughed until 1 a.m. on a Tuesday, while I lay awake, seething in my bedroom, an early presentation looming the next morning. When her friends finally left, I confronted her about our no visitors agreement. She dismissed me, saying I was being uptight and that I wasn't using the living room anyway since I was always working or sleeping. I should have thrown her out then. Instead, I retreated, that familiar feeling of being simultaneously angry and guilty washing over me, her specialty. By week 2, I was sleeping poorly, missing deadlines, and finding excuses to stay out of my own apartment. I worked from coffee shops until they closed, then lingered over dinner at places I couldn't afford, delaying my return home. My credit card balance climbed as my productivity plummeted. A client put a project on hold, citing concerns about my recent attention to detail. That was a $3,000 hit I couldn't afford. The final straw came when my landlord, Mr. Thompson, texted me, "Need to discuss multiple noise complaints and unauthorized pet. Please call ASAP." My lease specifically prohibited pets. Winston's presence alone could get me evicted. The building had a strict 3-strike policy, and this was apparently strike 2. That night, I worked up my courage during my extended dinner at the Cheesecake Factory. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd be firm, but kind. Enough was enough. She needed to leave. Tomorrow. I arrived home to find Melanie hosting yet another gathering. 5 people this time, music thumping, Winston running free on my now sticky hardwood floors. Someone had spilled red wine on my white IKEA rug, the stain spreading like a crime scene. Melanie called out to me as if I were the latecomer to my own home, claiming they had saved me some pizza. The pizza box was empty except for crusts. I waited until her friends left at midnight, each one giving me awkward nods as they departed. Then I took a deep breath and dove in, telling her this wasn't working and that she needed to find another place by tomorrow. I expected protest, perhaps tears or manipulation. What I didn't expect was the cold, calculating look that replaced her perpetual party girl smile. "Actually," she said calmly, reaching for her tote bag, "I don't have to leave." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the counter toward me. "I've been here for 3 weeks now. In Oregon, that makes me a tenant. You can't just kick me out without proper notice." My stomach dropped as she flipped open the folder, revealing printouts of tenant rights laws, sections highlighted in neon yellow. She'd prepared for this moment. She pointed to a paragraph claiming that after 14 days of residence, she'd established tenancy, and I legally needed to give her 30 days written notice before starting eviction proceedings. During those 30 days, she would have full legal right to remain there. She suggested we figure out a roommate arrangement that worked for both of us. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I grabbed the counter for support, scanning the documents with rising panic. They looked official, with state codes and legal terminology. I didn't understand. I stammered that she didn't pay rent and was just a guest. She shrugged, saying it didn't matter. She'd established residency by receiving mail there. She'd been having Amazon packages delivered. She kept personal property there and slept there every night. Legally, this was her residence too. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Had I accidentally signed away my rights to my own apartment? Was she right? The confidence with which she presented these facts made me doubt myself. I repeated that she needed to leave. She challenged me, asking what I would do. Call the cops? She claimed they would tell me the same thing, that this was a civil matter now. If I wanted her gone, I would have to do it legally. 30 days written notice, filed with the county. She then walked to the bathroom, conversation apparently over. I stood frozen in my kitchen, surrounded by the aftermath of a party I hadn't authorized, in an apartment that apparently wasn't fully mine anymore. That night, I slept maybe 2 hours total, my mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. I imagined being trapped with Melanie for months, watching her slowly take over more of my space, my life, my sanity. By morning, I'd moved from panic to cold determination. If Melanie wanted to play legal games, fine. I'd find out exactly what the rules were and how to win. My first call was to David, my neighbor across the hall. We weren't close, but we had that neighborly rapport of collecting each other's packages and nodding hello in the elevator. What Melanie didn't know was that David was a police officer, a fact I'd learned when I occasionally spotted him in uniform heading to his shift. When I explained my situation, keeping my voice low in the hallway outside my apartment, he told me it was complicated. She was partially right. Oregon does have strong tenant protection laws, but there's a difference between a tenant and a guest who's overstayed their welcome. He recommended I document everything. When she arrived, the lack of any rental agreement, any text messages showing the temporary nature of the arrangement, and all incidents of disruption. He also advised me to call my landlord immediately, as this affected my lease too. My conversation with Mr. Thompson was uncomfortable but necessary. I explained everything, including Winston's unauthorized presence. To my surprise, he was understanding, saying this happens more than you'd think. People try to take advantage of our state's tenant-friendly laws, but she wasn't on my lease, and I was violating my own agreement by having her there this long without approval. Rather than punishing me, he offered to help by sending me a formal letter stating that I was in violation of my lease by having an unauthorized occupant, which might help my case. My third call was to Simon Green, my parents' friend who happened to be a real estate attorney. I'd babysat his kids through college, and he'd always told me to call if I ever needed legal help. I never thought I'd actually take him up on it. Simon listened carefully, then chuckled, saying my friend did her research, but not well enough. She was bluffing with half-truths. He explained that while Oregon does have strong tenant protections, establishing tenancy typically requires one of several things: payment of rent, a written agreement, or explicit permission to stay permanently. Melanie had none of these. She was what they legally call a licensee, someone who had permission to enter and remain temporarily, but whose permission has now been revoked. I had the right to require her to leave. Simon helped me draft 2 documents: a formal letter revoking any permission for Melanie to stay in my apartment, giving her 48 hours to vacate, and a cease and desist letter regarding her disruptive behavior and unauthorized use of my personal property. When I asked what would happen if she still refused to leave after receiving these, he said we could involve the police for a civil standby, while she removed her belongings, and that Officer David could help coordinate that. Simon also suggested I gather evidence that this was a temporary arrangement from the start. I scrolled through our text messages, finding her original just a few days request, my clear conditions, and several instances where I'd asked about her progress finding her own place. Armed with this information, I felt a renewed sense of control. I spent the day working from a coffee shop, preparing my approach. When I returned home that evening, Melanie was lounging on my couch, scrolling through her phone, Winston running on his wheel beside her. I told her we needed to talk about her. Leaving tomorrow, she tried to reach for her folder of tenant laws, but I cut her off, saying I'd consulted with an attorney and that she wasn't a tenant. She was a guest whose permission to stay had been revoked. Her expression flickered between surprise and calculation as she tried to argue that her lawyer was wrong and that she'd established residency. Firmly countered that she hadn't. She'd never paid rent. We had no written agreement. My text explicitly stated this was temporary, and importantly, her presence violated my lease agreement. I handed her Mr. Thompson's letter, which clearly stated I was in violation by having an unauthorized occupant and pet. If she didn't leave, I would lose my apartment and then neither of us would have a place to stay. Her eyes darted between the documents, her confidence visibly wavering as she continued to claim she knew her rights. I informed her she had 48 hours to vacate my apartment voluntarily, after which I'd arranged for a police officer to be present while she removed her belongings. At the mention of police, her facade cracked. I told her Officer David from apartment 4B had already agreed to assist, watching her process that our neighbor was law enforcement. He would be there Wednesday at 6 p.m. if she hadn't left by then. She sputtered about illegal eviction, but with less conviction. I clarified that this was about removing a trespasser who no longer had permission to be there, and handed her Simon's letter as her formal notice. I'd also emailed a copy to her and her parents. The mention of her parents was a calculated move. I'd found their contact information while preparing and included them in the email. Melanie had always been oddly concerned about her parents' opinion, even as an adult. She stared at me with rage and disbelief, saying I had no right to contact her family. I calmly replied that I was just keeping everyone informed about her housing situation since she was so concerned about proper notice and documentation. Something in my tone must have convinced her I wasn't bluffing. She stood up, clutching Winston's cage against her chest like a shield, saying she would find somewhere else but that this wasn't over. I simply replied that it would be in 48 hours, updated. Just got back from the police station filing a report. Several of you asked if I thought Melanie had done this before. Turned out yes. The officer recognized her name from similar complaints. Apparently this is her MO. For those asking about my landlord, yes, he's being incredibly understanding, now that he knows I'm handling it. Has anyone else encountered a professional guest like this? The next 48 hours were tense. Melanie oscillated between tearful pleas about having nowhere to go, angry accusations about everything we'd been through, and cold silence. She made several phone calls in hushed tones, presumably trying to find another victim host. I remained firm, repeating only that she needed to be out by Wednesday at 6 p.m. I took Tuesday off work and stayed home, worried she might damage my belongings or steal something out of spite. I needn't have bothered. She spent most of the day sleeping, then left in the evening without a word. When she returned around midnight, she smelled like a brewery and slammed doors loud enough to wake the neighbors. Wednesday morning, she made a final attempt, claiming she was just trying to buy time to find a place and suggesting we could work something out. She could pay rent, split utilities. I simply told her no, that this arrangement wasn't working and she needed to leave today. Her face hardened as she said fine, but that she would need help moving her things. I told her I had to work, but Officer David would be there at 6 p.m. as planned. I spent the day at a nearby library, returning at 5:45 p.m. to find Melanie frantically shoving clothes into her suitcases. David arrived punctually at 6 in uniform, a detail I hadn't expected but appreciated immensely for the psychological impact. He greeted us professionally, saying he understood there was a situation that needed resolution. Melanie glared at Me but addressed David with a sugary smile, claiming it was just a misunderstanding and that she was gathering her things. He said he would wait until she was ready to go. His presence changed the dynamic completely. Melanie's passive-aggressive comments ceased, replaced by efficient packing. Within an hour, her belongings were crammed into her 4 suitcases and 3 additional garbage bags. Winston's cage was precariously balanced on top of the largest suitcase. She announced that she'd called an Uber that would be there in 3 minutes. I said nothing, standing by my door as David helped her carry her things to the elevator. Just before leaving, she turned back with an unreadable expression, saying that I had changed. The college me would have helped a friend in need. I replied that the college me was a doormat and that real friends don't take advantage. The door closed behind her, and suddenly my apartment was mine again, messy with lingering evidence of her stay, but mine. I changed the locks the next morning, with Mr. Thompson's approval, installed a Ring doorbell camera, and spent the weekend deep cleaning every surface. I found evidence of her attempted tenancy claims scattered throughout. Mail addressed to her that she'd apparently ordered specifically to create a paper trail, personal items strategically placed in different rooms, and even a small notebook, where she documented her residence with daily entries and photos. The following Monday, I received an email from Simon. He'd been contacted by another attorney inquiring about Melanie's illegal eviction from my apartment. Simon's response had been brief and devastating, laying out the legal facts and mentioning that Officer David had documented the entire process. We never heard from that attorney again. 2 weeks later, I received a series of increasingly aggressive texts from Melanie demanding I forward her mail. I referred her to the post office for an address change form and blocked her number. Life slowly returned to normal. My productivity recovered, my client relationships stabilized, and my credit card balance began its gradual descent. Mr. Thompson even refunded my pet violation fee once the situation was fully explained. The only lasting change was my newly developed screening process for anyone entering my home. Friends joked about filling out the application form I now require before letting someone crash on my couch, but they understand after hearing the Melanie story. 6 months later, I was having drinks with a college friend who casually mentioned running into Melanie. She's staying with Jess from our econ class. Temporarily, of course. I nearly choked on my Moscow Mule. For how long? Going on 3 weeks, I think. Why? I immediately texted Jess a warning, only to receive a frustrated response. Too late. She's already claiming tenant rights and refusing to leave. It wasn't just me. Melanie had turned this into a systematic scam, finding old acquaintances, spinning sob stories, then using tenant laws to secure free housing. I later learned she'd done this to at least 4 people in the past year. The experience taught me several painful but valuable lessons. First, kindness should never come at the expense of boundaries. I'd mistaken setting limits for being mean, when really it's the foundation of any healthy relationship. Second, trust your instincts. The red flags I'd ignored from our college days hadn't disappeared. They just evolved into more sophisticated manipulation tactics. Third, know your rights. Melanie's scheme relied on her victim's legal ignorance and conflict avoidance. A single consultation with an attorney had unraveled her entire plan. Finally, it reinforced the importance of community. Without David, Simon, and even Mr. Thompson, I might have been stuck with an unwanted roommate for months. Last week, I spotted a social media post from Melanie, a cheerful selfie captioned, "New Beginnings in Chicago." I felt a twinge of pity for whoever's couch she was currently occupying, followed by profound relief that it wasn't mine. My apartment feels different now, not just because it's once again arranged exactly how I like it, without Winston's cage, or Melanie's clutter. It feels like a space I've actively reclaimed, a boundary I've deliberately set and defended. The experience cost me temporary peace and several $100s, but the lesson in self-advocacy was priceless. Updated. 6 months later and still Melanie-free. Thank you for all the support and legal advice. I've been helping Jess and another mutual friend document everything to get Melanie out of their places too. We're considering sharing our experiences on a tenant warning website. Do you think exposing scammers like Melanie publicly is going too far, or is it our duty to warn others?